Now we're going to continue with the second panel. Thank you to the first panelists and to Andreas for moderating that. It was a great discussion. So, as I was mentioning at the beginning, this panel is going to be the practices of designing the social or for social change, or the practices of social design. And today we have the really privilege actually to have this amazing set of panelists. We have Christopher Boyko, Francesco Mazzarella, and Jenny Natusch, right? So I'm going to pass the microphone to them and they're going to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Chris Boyko. I'm an academic in the School of Design at Lancaster University. And I'd like to say, kind of starting off, that I'm perhaps an accidental social designer. So I mentioned this to the panelists when we were talking, I think is a lack of confidence in comparison to what I hear from everyone else and all the amazing work they do. But I'd say I'm an accidental social designer on two fronts. One is that my background is in social sciences. So I have an understanding of psychology, but then also in town planning and the conceptual side of the design of cities. And so I am situated within a School of Design, and I think over the many years that I've been a part of the School of Design at Lancaster, I've sort of absorbed slowly, it's leached into me, these ideas about what a designer could be, what a social designer could be like. And the methods and processes that they may use. The other way that I'm sort of accidental is in reference to a research project I did a few years ago called Remembering Resistance, which was looking at women's activism in the north of England over the last 100 years. And on that project I was brought in because I was interested in understanding where protest happens, and particularly the spatial component of where protest happens. So do they happen in squares? Do they happen in streets in front of government buildings and so on? And while that project started, we had a group of volunteers who had either been activists themselves or were just interested in the topic that we're looking at. We had some academics as part of this team, and no one ended up being interested in this. No one was interested in where protest happened. So I found myself actually taking some of the methods and processes that I've learned, that have sort of absorbed into me by being in the School of Design, and I started to bring those to our workshops, to our project meetings, to what we designed, what we created, and so it's been a really interesting experience. So accidental in that sense as well, whereas I didn't feel that I was a designer on this project, but I became a kind of designer on the project, and that was been a really interesting experience for me. So that's kind of who I am. I'll pass this over.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me. My name is Francesco Mazzarella and I am senior lecturer in fashion and design for social change. But actually I define myself as a design researcher, educator and design activist, or even better, I like always to reference I always struggle to define myself, and one of my project participants told me that my job is about planting seeds of hope and change, working with marginalized communities. And also, in order to define myself, I brought one of a textile artifact that I created. It's a textile autobiographies. In my project with refugees, we use fashion and textiles to express our personal and cultural identity. And we all created a textile autobiography because it's kind of a glimpse into our lives in textile form. And I called it Crafting Journeys because I define myself as a craftsman of my own life that looks like a patchwork of the different cultures from the countries where I lived. So you can see 6 countries, 6 fabrics, the cheetah from Brazil where I've lived, the velvet from the elegant architecture in Turin and in Italy, the Nottingham lace where I did my PhD, Hungary, Netherlands and South Africa. And at the center of it, there is the Tree of Life, which is for me a reminder of my journey towards spirituality and the synergies with all the people and the communities I create. And also it's a reminder of seeking constant change, while both in myself but also in others, and crafting opportunities for other people as well to craft their own journeys. So in one of the projects I will be talking on, I work with asylum seekers and refugees based in London, where we express the shifting identities as we are rebuilding our lives in a new place. And I also have lived the experience of migration, but, and as well I'm very interested in co-creation processes to create social value through learning new skills, making new connections in the community, building the sense of self-worth, and also building resilience within ourselves and in the community.
Whoa. Look, how do I follow that? So I'm Jenny Natusch, and I'm an artist, so I feel like a bit of a wild card. I'm not an academic. How do I describe myself? Well, I was a textile designer, so I love that. And I was then a children's wear designer, and I've worked in technology, and I've worked in television and entertainment design. And I'm also a mum on a mission. And the reason that I am accidentally doing social design is because I had 4 teenagers, and one of them got quite ill. And I wanted to help find her more things to do. This was in 2018. And I ran around thinking I'd go back with a big menu of things, and she'd say, "Thanks, Mum, I'll do that on a Monday, that on a Tuesday, that on a Wednesday." But I realised that society has a bit of a blind spot to 11 to 18-year-olds, and they can't really afford to go to do anything, and they're not really allowed to do a lot. I saw a great quote that said that this age group were too old for the playground, too broke for the cafe, and too young for the pub. And anyway, being an artist myself, I asked my local artist friends if they, knew of anything going, and they said, "Well, no, but we could do a paint rave, or we could do clock making," and they came up with all these amazing ideas. And then I started speaking to local businesses, and they said we could do ice cream making, we could do architecture, hairdressing, Indian cookery. And I thought, oh my goodness, here's this global problem, this very serious global problem, but here's this really fun, playful, local solution. And actually, if we can put a model together, we could do something about it. So our charity is called Escape to Make, and we've now worked with 1,100 11 to 18-year-olds since 2018. We help them escape from whatever they're struggling with, and we help them to make things, make friends, and make a difference. And we do that through creative workshops with local artists, but they're not just making their pot or their upcycled fashion outfit or whatever and going home. Whatever they make results in a community event. And so that really heightens those young people's sense of purpose and belonging. So it's this real fitting in, so we go the extra mile to bring them from all walks of life, because we all need that sense of belonging and fitting in, don't we? But we also need that sense of purpose. And the community events, which are in the form of cabarets and heritage markets and green festivals and whatever they want to do, because we have a youth board where it's all designed by young people, they do. And yeah, that's me and our charity in a nutshell. And now we're getting interest from different communities around Lancashire and around the country, actually. So we're trying to think about how do we get this really right, and then we can scale it. Yeah.
That's great. We have 4 questions here. I'm going to, but I don't know which one to tackle because I think you have covered some of them already. So, could you give us some example of participatory method that you have designed or have inspired your practice? Is that right? Yeah. Good.
So I have an example. So this is a project that I worked on, so not Remembering Resistance, but another project called Mobilize. And there's a short summary that Nuri very helpfully designed up there on the back. So it was a project looking at asylum seekers and refugees who are living here in Lancaster. And what we were trying to do is a project. There was me, there was somebody who is now at St. Andrews University in politics. We had a small group of volunteers volunteers and some asylum seekers and refugees. And we were interested in understanding how they could be more engaged civically and politically in life in Lancaster. They had a lot of barriers, clearly, coming to this country, and had some basic help from the government and from the charity that we were partnering with. But they often had questions about how to work, not how to work, but how to sort of be a civic person in this country. And so the project was about how to enable that to happen. But along the way, we kind of hit a bump in the road where, as a project, I think the project team knew where we were going, but we were not communicating that very well to anyone else on the project. And so there was a lot of distrust amongst the volunteers and our charity partner. They didn't know what we were really doing, even though we thought we were explaining it to them in our words, not working. So I turned to a set of tools called Leapfrog, which was a project, Debbie, that you worked on. Is that right? And Roger too, which set up a fantastic array of tools to help designers and others to tackle problems and issues and so on. And so I'd used a tool there called Sea of Trust. And it was a really nice visual tool where you had cutouts of sharks and sailing boats and waves and so on. And people could use these to express levels of mistrust where they could be achieving harmony and so on. And we did this as an exercise within one of our workshops. And it really helped everyone on the project to articulate how they were feeling, and it helped us to come together as a team to understand where the different perspectives were and how we can overcome that. And actually from that we developed a set of project values, and that we kind of held on to those through the duration of the project. And it was a really pivotal moment. Not only were we able to address these issues of trust and mistrust, but then also to say what we valued as a project. And so every single time we went to a meeting or we had a workshop, we started by reiterating those values and making sure that everyone understood that this was where we were coming from, so that if anyone from outside the project was going to challenge it, that we could come back to these. And it was a really, really helpful kind of point for us to turn from a project where trust was an issue into something that it was less of an issue. So, yeah.
Shall I take this question? Yeah, also thanks for highlighting the issue of trust, which is fundamental in social design projects. In my case, I often start projects, and it's important, and I'm always very interested in the issue of designers often being parachuted into marginalized or vulnerable communities. So I tend to, as much as possible, and I'm aware of my positionality and sometimes being an outsider, but to try to mediate that, I acknowledge my positionality, even my privilege sometimes, and try to redistribute the position of power by working with other people and giving space and agency and voice to other people who are often ignored. And I use design ethnography to get a sense of the place, especially when I've worked, for instance, in Brazil, in South Africa, and to identify challenges that can be tensions for change or opportunities for change. Then I use a lot of storytelling, which is also a bit what Eva was talking about. And in my case, we do storytelling sessions on a one-to-one basis, and often mediated by objects. So we bring objects that are culturally meaningful to us as a prompt for conversations about identity, culture, skills, aspirations for the future, and so on. I also use sense-making workshops, which is about envisioning. So because I often move between past, present, and future, especially considering transient lives, it's also about understanding what a more compassionate future could look like. And then I facilitate lots of co-creation workshops with different service design tools. And finally, as well, I'm interested in activating a legacy with a community. So I host also roundtable discussions with different stakeholders to outline an action plan. Some notes on this also: throughout this process, it's important to build partnerships that are around shared values and shared visions, and also negotiate this process of change so that you can co-deliver an intervention. And then it's also very important to have continuous evaluation and improvement, and also then, as a participatory action research project, having a cycle of reflection, and then that leads to planning the next cycle. Something want to also share is one of my previous projects was called Making for Change, Waltham Forest, which was in a deprived area of East London. It was elected London Borough of Culture, and I worked with the city, with the council, but also with many stakeholders. And initially they only gave me a seed fund, and I did an art residency within the town hall, and as well it was tricky because I said, what's your research about? It's about activism, and they were scared I would disrupt government. But actually it's about using an ethnographic approach to do an indirect or slow form of activism from within and changing the system from within. But that was very important to really co-design the program together with different council departments and lots of community partners. And some of the tools I've developed, for instance, in my PhD, have almost become now a mindset, and I often adapt and transfer them to different contexts. So for instance, I talk about values and shared vision. So I often use a manifesto tool that is about bringing different stakeholders to share some values, because my work is often about creating communities, and there needs to be an alignment of values for this community to work well. Although, of course, it's also good to have tensions because that can lead to innovation. And then in my latest project, we do that, where we reflect on our individual values, the values shared within the group, and then we come up with manifestos. And then now I'm working more with fashion and textiles, and we created textile banners that they are co-created and visualize these visions for the future. And for instance, we use them in a public action in Parliament Square in London to protest against the UK illegal migration bill. I mean, I'm sure there is much more, but maybe I will pass it to Jenny on this.
Thank you. So, well, of course, our journey all happened a bit accidentally, as I've just explained. So it's all been very organic. And I'm a great believer in actually you need a certain amount of strategy, but you also need to let it be a bit organic as well, because human lives are messy, like you said. And you have to go with the flow a bit. So at the very beginning, when I didn't know what I was doing, we just did some surveys. So I went to 4 different schools, and I dumped off a pile of surveys, and I said, ask young people, are they lonely? I probably didn't phrase the questions as well as I could have done, but are they lonely? Do they want more friends? Do they have enough to do outside of school? About 15 questions. And it came back that, yeah, they're really lonely and they do want more to do outside of school. And so that's when we knew that we had something worth testing. So we put on 10 test workshops, working with local artists around town on a shoestring of £2,000. 247 teenagers signed up within 24 hours from one Facebook post. And then we knew we were onto something. We didn't evaluate it very well. I didn't know how that happened. But we did ask a few questions, and it was like, yeah, they want more. And they made a film. One of the workshops was they made a film, and that film then brought in £25,000, and we piloted another 24 ideas. I used to be a TV producer, as I mentioned, at the BBC. So when parents and carers came and cried on my shoulder and said, our boy hasn't left the house for 18 months and this is the first thing he's engaged with, or our daughter wanted to kill herself and we have been tearing her hair out, and we've been to CAMS and we've been here and we've been there, and they've taken part in these workshops, and now we've got a different child. And that was just piloting over 3 weekends. So I said, will you say this on camera? So we captured that on camera. We made an impact film. To a really good standard, because I didn't know what I was doing. I still didn't know what I was doing really, but I knew that, if you film people, testimonials, stories, getting the stories is so powerful. So we made this powerful film, we showed that, we got more money in. And then we realized that I went and I got a mentor. Getting mentors is really important, especially when you don't know what you're doing. So I found this brilliant guy who was 24 years old, and he was the CEO of the Arts Council Bridge Company, Curious Minds. He gave me amazing advice and said, you need a youth board. We set up a youth board, and that youth board is now 12 young people from all walks of life, truly representing a very good representation of who we have living here in Lancaster and Morecambe. And so they design everything we do. And just to finish up, they're also designing a building. And we said to them at the beginning, when we were working with a local architecture firm, we said, this is probably never going to happen, but let's have some fun trying, you know, because it's that entrepreneurial spirit. It's that courage of give something a go, because you don't get that at school. You don't really get the meaningful opportunities, and you don't really get that. It's like, it might happen, but it probably won't. Manage expectations. But then they've ended up working, the chair of our charity is the ex-vice president of Disney now. He's brought in world-class architects. They're meeting the World Health Organization next week, some of them. So, you know, it's like this journey has just evolved organically, and just through listening to young people and what they want. Yeah, and then the Museum of Architecture, because we got a bit frightened. I mean, me and Zoe were like, we don't know how to do this, hold this space with all these young people, and they want to reimagine youth centres for the 21st century. How did we do it? So we brought in the Museum of Architecture. That's before we'd started talking to David and Lancaster University, and they came up and facilitated 4 of Eden Project's core team. The designers came up. There were 56 people, more than half of them were young people, and they designed this space. So yeah, we're just sort of winging it, but you know, and listening to the young people, and their spirit is now anything goes, and that's contagious, and you know, we're playing.
That's brilliant. It's really interesting that I'm going to scrap the script a little bit. It's really interesting that you're always talking about, you know, a thing that at some point, you know, by bringing people together, sometimes start emerging. Like, for example, you said that you use this kind of tool from the LeapFrog project to mediate some issues that you have. You have all the artifact that you're producing, and the film that you said that, you know, it was very impactful and actually was purposely impactful actually to raise awareness of that. So I wonder in terms of your own practices, what was the role of those kind of materials, those kind of things that, you know, it could be tangible, like, you know, we design an object, like the example that we have in the previous panel, or it could be something intangible. It could be like a video, it could be a thing, it could be a message. What is the role of that in your own initiatives? Anyone? Do you want to?
Okay. Well, of course, design and making go hand in hand. And also in participatory design, in a way, we often make things together, and the process of making things together, it creates a sense of equality. Also, I work with people from around the world with huge language barriers, and actually through the process of making things together, we can understand each other better. We also break hierarchies. I also must admit, I'm not trained in fashion and textile design, so I can't make, actually Laura helped me make this, but, and I hire some of my ex-students who are brilliant and facilitate the making process. And actually as well, I acknowledge in that process, I actually become very vulnerable. I'm also a perfectionist, and I get very frustrated when I can't hold a needle and make good things. But actually as well, and I play with this deliberately, because I actually want to break the barriers. Like my participants, they call me professor and all of it, and say, to be honest, no, I'm here and we all engage in the process of making and learning together, and as well the making breaks the barriers. In terms of artifacts, yes, there is the textile autobiographies. We also have a film that you will be able to see over there. We have textile banners, we have garments that are made, and in a way, all of this, we talk about very intangible social issues. Refugees have fled their countries due to violence, war, persecution, and in a way, fashion and textiles, the materiality of fashion and textiles help you express yourself and rebuild your life. Actually, on this side, I also want to admit that I feel a bit uncomfortable talking on behalf of very many other vulnerable people. So I wish they could be here with me, and I wanted to bring some of their work, but it's stored in my cabinet because we are planning an exhibition at the Barbican soon. But I wanted to read out some of the quotes from them, and actually this reflect. Every participant, we all write a statement that goes with the artifact. And she said, I'm here to find myself. I'm here to find myself. We can pray for this to happen every day and night. The reason why I do this is because I know that a picture can send a message to the outside world. If someone sees this, referring to the artifact, they know that this lady is still fighting for their freedom. So as well, these artifacts become a provocation really to shifting narratives around refugees. We often think of refugees as people who lack skills, confidence, opportunities, but actually they have huge potential. And as well, in this process of making things together, and the artifacts can become prompts for raising awareness, creating relationships, conversations, and so on.
I was going to say the same thing. All of that, actually no. But I think one of the things that I found when we've used design to make things, of physical things, I think I've also seen some of our volunteers on the project, they get really excited because they then go, oh, I could do that. I can use this tool, and I can take this in this context and use it in a slightly different way. And so that kind of sense of empowerment that I think Laura and Eva were talking about earlier is really interesting. So it's about kind of handing over that skill set or that understanding of how design could work in this case to so that other people can use it, I think is really, really interesting. I think as a social scientist, it's not something that we would do because we talk a lot. And so by having that physical thing or that material thing is so powerful, and yet we don't necessarily, we sometimes take it for granted, I think. So, yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, so other things that our youth board have made is they've made films because they have these ideas, and because we're a creative educational charity, we've supported them to make films of what their vision is. So they've made an amazing film of their dream building, which, you know, might never happen, but they're having some fun trying. And they've also worked with virtual reality experts to make a virtual reality film of their dream, and then they're tools for us to go and show to funders and people to share their vision for what they want. And then us as an organisation, something that we really need right now so we can share our learning with the other communities that are asking for it, because I'm spending too much time in meetings explaining to other people how to set up youth boards and how to do paint raves and green festivals. So if we had it all in a playbook, in a manual, then that would be a really useful thing. So there's a consultant from the Northern Powerhouse who really likes the Escape to Make model. She's starting to work with us to write a bid to the Arts Council so we can get some funding to write that playbook. And then we can get it together with our website that, again, the young people have helped to design the website, which will also be a booking system, a registration system, and an evaluation system. So evaluation is so important. And then we'll have that whole package, which will be our way to sort of share it out with the world. It's also just a good operations manual for us, but it's a way to share. Can I say a word on evaluation here, or I don't want to steal any more questions, but evaluation is so important. I've now learnt, accidentally learnt how important it is, because it's the evaluation that gets the funding in. And we do our evaluation through capturing stories, through videoing. So we brought in professors, and we've got a memorandum of understanding with the University of Cumbria who come and record the stories. They bring in professors and doctors to record the stories, not just with the young people, but with their parents and carers, with the volunteers, with the facilitators. Then, of course, we've got a whole load of data just from the booking form when they're signing up, so we can see all sorts about the young people, and that's really valuable information for the funders. But what we haven't got, and what we need, and I don't know if there's anybody at Lancaster University can help us with this, but we need a longitudinal impact study, because we know that those young people we think that we might be, with some of them, we might be altering the course of their life, because for some of them we're definitely helping them with their well-being, for others we're helping them with their life chances. And we hear, oh, you know that boy that was on the cabaret that did the main course, that cooked the main course, he's now gone to Kendall Catering College, and this other boy's ended up doing architecture in Canada, and we helped him with his personal statement, you know, when he was on our architecture course. And so it's like we need to track that, and it's very difficult to track because there's holes in GDPR. With young people's data, how do you track that? But there must be a way around it, because if we can get around that, then public health experts have told us that that will open up funding to us no end. So if anybody has any brainwaves of how we could do that and do it quickly, then it will really make a big difference to us. Sorry if I shouldn't have done that kind of ask here, but it felt like the right place.
Actually, I think it was the right place, because the next question I was going to ask, it was more about around the ethics of, you know, working with people. And, you know, you touch a little bit in terms of what do we do with the data, you know, in a way we all have kind of this positive intention, that's why we are doing what we are doing, but at the same time, there might be some vulnerabilities that we need to be aware of. And so how do we deal with that as well when we do this type of project too? Like how we practice the social design or the social focus activity that we're doing in a way that is, you know, it's not creating any harm, or it's not making anyone vulnerable.
I'm sorry, Francesco, I'm going to steal the answer that we talked about earlier. So it was around, we were talking about like self-care, so self-care from the project team, and how important it was, because we as the project team, as designers or whoever, are experiencing potentially quite traumatic issues that our participants might be experiencing, and how do we look after ourselves is really, really important. I had received a tiny bit of funding to do a workshop that connected activism and data, and that was great. And we were going to hold it as a sort of a regular workshop, and we turned it into a retreat where we spent the whole day having discussions, but then also spending specific periods of time for just self-care. So you could go off into the corner and just relax, lay down. You know, there was food always available. We had a sharing session where we had a digital campfire. So we had our screens set up with a campfire going. We all just kind of sat around it and just sat and talked. And it was really, really nice. We still talked about data and activism, but we really wanted to incorporate this idea of self-care, because what we were talking about was really traumatic for quite a lot of people and triggering, and it also affected us in a lot of ways. And we didn't necessarily, it was important that we were able to be in a safe space with each other to talk about this with each other, but then we also needed to know that there was access to other support mechanisms on campus. But I think in that, first and foremost, we wanted to take care of ourselves because of the work that we were doing.
Yeah, I also will emphasize on the importance of safe spaces. As well, we are starting to mapping out the systems of being a refugee or asylum seeker in London, and we have mapped out the different stakeholders they engage with. But some of these interactions are very transactional, like they access legal advice from the Home Office, housing from the Home Office, and so on. But then actually they say that they lack a safe space or a space of social belonging. And even if this was not planned in our project initially, actually feedback says that our project is providing that safe space. And of course, doing these projects in a higher education institution, we have to have the ethics approval, which is very important. But as well, sometimes all these processes are very long and at odds with the emergency of transient lives or refugees. And also as well, you can't really predict all what's happening. There are some unintended consequences. And in a way, also, I acknowledge I'm not a psychologist. And initially, when I wrote the bid, I didn't think about budget for a psychologist, but now we have a small grant and we have budgeted a counselor. So the refugees, the participants can access counseling services. But as well, that's also, and actually we realized because one of the participants in the middle of the project, she lost her father, and as a refugee, you can't even go back to the funeral of your own father. And that, but all of these are unpredictable. So even now that we have counseling available, how can you do the service design of this? Like how, we don't know when an accident or when a trigger conversation will emerge throughout the making process. So it's still tricky also, even when you have funding and you have a person there, sometimes we are paying the person and nothing happens, everything goes smooth, and which is better actually, that nothing goes wrong. But then of course, how to optimize that resource. But saying this is that we really need to work with trauma-informed professionals that can deal with the dark sides of design for social good, because as Laura was saying, yeah, sometimes we also can make some mess. And yet I think we need to also move beyond considering ethics as a kind of a process that we need to do, but really move towards a framework of ethics of care. And I think in a way in this process we are all vulnerable. For instance, I also had the project brief for my master's students working with refugees, and putting these very two diverse different words together, it opened up lots of tensions. The refugees didn't realize how privileged the students are, but then as well holding that safe space allowed them to raise awareness and understand these two words. And also we are doing this whilst there are lots of conflicts, and some of the participants had actually fled their countries due to war. And as we started the student project, the conflict in Gaza also exploded. So there are lots of emotions, and students felt very vulnerable. But in the end, they say that actually we dealt ethically with the vulnerability, and that turned into an opportunity for change in yourself and in others. And that's very transformative. Yeah.
So our ethics are really embedded into our mission, vision and values, which our youth board helped to write, by the way. And our mission is to have safe, kind, welcoming spaces. And if you break that down, then the safety bit, well, that's, working with children and young people, you really have to make sure that, you've got enhanced DBS checked people. You've got a really strong safeguarding policy. You've got all the right advisors and systems and everything around you to keep that safe. People-wise, you need to make sure that you're getting the parental permissions in and all of that. Safe, the kindness and the welcoming bit really comes from the diversity. And it's the EDI thing, which, is so important, because we're trying to create spaces where everybody feels that sense of belonging and safe to come along, and to have people from all walks of life. So whether they're from, we work with 25 different schools, and then we work with young people who are coming in from Ukraine, and they've maybe coming from CAMS, or they've been sectioned, and they're, so really highly vulnerable people. So ethics is super important to us, and creating that space and keeping it safe and super organized is absolutely paramount.
But one thing as well, we do follow the procedures of the university, but actually as well, then it can become messy, because the language they use. So I draft my consent forms, for instance, and they say, no, there's also you can't talk about consent because they can withdraw consent, so it's not legally appropriate. And you need to have a participation agreement, and as well, you need to be mindful that refugees are required to fill in forms all the time, and that's very triggering. And as well, not only I wasted time, I had my forms that already were tested and used already, and it worked okay. And then I waste months waiting for the legal lawyers to come up with their agreements that I had to scrap, because it speaks a language that I didn't even understand. Imagine a refugee. So as well, making this accessible and inclusive, it's very important.
Sorry, I was going to add one more thing. The talk of safe space was, it just reminded me of something really particularly salient. So on that Mobilize project, working with asylum seekers and refugees and a charity, this was happening over COVID, so it started before COVID and then happened around it. And as a project team, we were really considering stopping the project because we wanted to give people time and space to work through whatever was happening in their own lives. But our project team, our volunteers said, actually, we want to meet online. Because this is the only time where we're not with our family, and we can, virtually speak to you, and that space is held for us just to talk and to vent and to be emotional, and that's what we did. And so we are acting in a very different capacity for a short period of time, but it was so important to our volunteers on that project that we had that space for them as well as for us, just to share. And so we were organized to some extent, but we also didn't try to micromanage that time, so that everyone had a chance just to see each other and to share. So I would use little design activities online just to get people talking and smiling, and that was what was needed then. It was really important.
Great. A lot of points in there that are really interesting in terms of, it's like stretching a little bit what we understand by ethics and like going beyond the checkbox of things that we need to ensure to fulfill in order to, to do things right. Because in a way we are working with social design and contexts are going to be different. The people that we're going to have around are going to be different. So the ethical approach also has to run that kind of extra mile actually to make it kind of proper for the people that we engage with. So interesting. There are a few more questions, but I'm aware of the time, so I want to pass the question bit to you, to the audience. Is there any question for our excellent panelists that we have today? No? Yeah?
Well, maybe I also ask a question because it's also related to my research. I face a lot of challenges like working with this one of the groups. And we're always talk about this kind of safe space. But actually, it's really hard to build this safe space. It's really, really hard. Especially if we want to include more people with high power or with high power. For example, if I want to let people to talk with people from government, for example, the refugees, the government, we want to transform the system. Sometimes this kind of space is not safe anymore. And it's really hard to say, well, we can create a safe space, we can do some like DIY things and we can do things, drawing things, but it's not safe. So what should we do if we face this kind of things? If we try to combine different stakeholders, if they have different power relationships, there's one also it's tricky.
Anyone would like to take?
Yeah, I think I also was wondering what are these ingredients of safe space, and I don't have a right answer, but there are several things. Some can be planned. It's like design for trust or design for empathy. It's very difficult because it's very contextual and very relational as well. And then I've asked my participants, was this a safe space, and if so, why? And many people also, it sounds pretentious maybe now, but they said because you were there holding the space. And it's difficult to translate because the fact that I was there for especially in the student project briefs, so the refugees attended the course with my master students also because they have engaged with me for 1 year, so there was trust and there was a relationship, and because otherwise if I wasn't there maybe they wouldn't have come. Or also in another project I remember once I couldn't come actually because I was in Lancaster, and then the community center told me, there was a fight between the women. I say, like, why? And say, because you were not there. So as well, in a way, it is maybe the relationship. It is political, and in a way, you represent an institution. So maybe in front of me, even if I make myself as invisible as possible, maybe they don't want to fight in front of. Yeah, Francesco is the project manager coming with the funding, or I don't know. But also the community. We haven't talked much about the community providers, or call them gatekeepers. Of course, having someone from the community will allow often as well. Yeah, also often we deliver workshops in the community center. So as well, it's a familiar space for them. And there are, of course, safeguarding measures in place, DBS, as we were discussing. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering correctly because there is not a right answer, but I think it depends. I think having some of the ingredients could have a community provider, use a community center that's familiar to them, build trust, build relationship, navigate the politics, have ethics procedures, have DBS check, have a psychologist or other professionals who could deal with this. And I think also every person is different. So some people may want their space when something is triggering to, in some of the sessions, some people were crying, for instance, and I encourage them to leave and just take a break. Whereas others, even when they are crying, even more they want to talk because their voice has often been ignored and silenced. So as well, if you think psychologically, you may need to allow them the space to be with themselves. Some people actually need the space to talk. So, and you are there and then. So being a social designer is very much an embedded and situated practice. And you need to be responsive and flexible to what the context and the community want and adapt and put the ingredients that are most needed then there.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Great, thank you. Dennis?
Just an addition, maybe, sorry, it's not a question, but I just thought, because we were talking about, when we talk about this project, we talk about refugees as the one group, and they're like the same, and they're not, and there's so much more to say about all those individuals and where they come from, and not always the most peaceful situations that they come from, so between kind of the religious groups, like the Alawites and the Sunnis, or, Turkish and Kurdish, or, all those things, and I imagine that the designer's role in, what you were saying about what existence just being there is like I guess, a bit like a mediator as well, where those kind of differences are, I don't know, through that designer maybe negotiated or maybe kind of becomes more amicable and somehow, so I wonder, in terms of your design, the design side, how do you consider those differences and how do you kind of work with all these kind of groups together? Because that also, I imagine, requires a lot of knowledge, like historical knowledge, contextual knowledge, or political knowledge as well.
Okay, I will start then, but please. Well, yeah, actually the ambition behind my project is, I agree, refugees, and sorry, for clarity, for lack of time, we're not unpacking what being a refugees mean, but of course they come from very different backgrounds and for very different reasons, and they're not a homogeneous community. So as well, my ambition behind the project initially was to sustain cultures, as well to honor and celebrate the diverse cultures, and as well in these conversations we are realizing that often culture can create tensions, and as you say, like even participants from different parts of Pakistan, they just have tensions, and or even between Pakistan and Iran, you are a woman, you are allowed to wear the hijab or not, and so you create that space, you try to make it safe, but then as well there are conflicts within the participants. I think our role is maybe, as you say, as a mediator, to facilitate dialogue and coexistence. And as well, another thing I want to mention is that sometimes, so as the participants say, for some people are very proud of their culture, they want to sustain it, whereas others, they have traumatic memories of their home countries and want to erase it and better integrate to the community where they are resettling. And I very much like referencing Stuart Hall, who says that we shouldn't consider culture as a return to our fixed roots, where we come from. In a way, it is important because it gives a sense of belonging. But on the other hand, we can consider culture as roots through which we navigate. Culture develops and allows us for integrating. So in a way, it is being mindful of where we come from, but as well creating a space for allowing our cultures as well to evolve and see if there are potential for integration. And then as well, you say as a designer, as well, when we make designs, as well, what we want to challenge is cultural appropriation as well. But some people, they also want to feel free to adopt and absorb other elements of other cultures because they've often been not allowed the space to be free to express themselves. And so there are all these tensions at the same time. And I'm not sure if I'm answering, but just sharing an experience of what happens in my work.
Thank you.
So my 4 teenagers once said to me, how would we meet anybody from the refugee community if we wanted to? And I didn't know how to answer them. And they said, how would we meet anybody from a different school if we wanted to, other than in a sports competition? And where are those spaces in society for young people to come together from all walks of life and to collaborate? Because surely that's the thing that's going to create a culture of compassion, a place where they can exchange perspectives and find out about each other's cultures and backgrounds. So what we do is we train our facilitators and workshops. We give them, they do all sorts of different training before they even go near the young people that we work with. And we tell them never to ask where anybody comes from, because that might be really triggering. And we work with some young people who have come from residential care homes, and they've never ever engaged with young people from mainstream education before. And so that's the last question that they're going to want to answer. So what we do is we create the space where they come together from all walks of life, and because we go the extra mile and we have real tactics and strategy to get them from all walks of life round this one table, that's the thing, that's our magic dust, that's what keeps it safe, actually, by bringing that variety together from all walks of life. I don't know how it would be if it was just refugees altogether, but we're sort of such a mixture of everybody. And then they're united with a positive common denominator, which is we're all here to do textiles or to do ice cream making. And then that's just a useful technique, because a lot of people will be anxious. And so then when they're doing something creative, they'll get in that state of flow, and then they'll relax, and then they'll start, and then maybe they'll ask each other where they're from, and they'll start talking to each other that way. And that's what we've seen happen, not specifically with the refugee groups, but with other groups.
And also I'm mindful of we are using the label refugee, which holds lots of stigma, but as well the language is also not appropriate and problematic. Maybe we can call them new arrivals, but anyway, as well, it's easy. I mean, for the funders, you call them refugees so they understand what's the problem about and they give you money, but as well, we should never, as well, in a space also where people, if they are in the room or not, as well, we shouldn't really use the label because it's also problematic.
Yeah, just to add to what Jenny said, I think this is where perhaps we've used this idea of creating a set of values from the start. Now, the groups of people that we've worked with perhaps are, particularly with our Women in Activism project, most of them were from working class backgrounds, they were white, and from the north of England. So they all had different stories to tell and different experiences, but there seemed to be some connections there. So having an activity where we set values perhaps made sense to them. But I could imagine if we had a much more diverse group of women involved in the project, that might have been problematic. And I'm not sure I would know how to deal with that. But I think it's important certainly to recognize, to say that this is something that should be there as part of any project that we work on, so that people feel safe in order to start connecting and seeing how they can work together. And as you said, it might not be right now where people ask where you're from and their life stories, but that you provide the scaffolding for which that can happen later on when people feel comfortable and vulnerable to do that. So, yeah.
Just would like to add the over-preparing. I think it's also important to do the homework in advance. I think most of the social design, or at least from my experience, the thing that I do when I practice the design, it happens before when we have the actual intervention, call it workshop or whatever, with the communities. It's all the work that we do before, actually, to make sure that moment is going to be kind of safe, and it's going to be flawless, and there are not going to be issues arising, which means like talking with a lot of people to understand the politics that are going to emerge in there, talking with a lot of people to see what kind of things are going to be triggering before in advance, building the trust to get to that moment and feel like, well, now we are safe, we are sure that we have everything in place. But all the heavy work, I think, is even before of that moment. So doing the homework in advance would be my tip. Nobody asked me, but anyways. Eva, you have a question?
Yes, I have a completely other question, maybe that's, but that was concerning Jenny, when you talked about evaluation again. I mean, it's a super interesting question and so difficult. I mean, we also are facing it constantly. I mean, so how do you evaluate, not only the qualitative, right? I mean, not only the participatory aspects and so on, but the long term, that's what you are talking about, right? I mean, we got a bit help, Thomas and I, as a center up in Aarhus in Denmark for child research. And they're really dealing with these long-term effects. For instance, of having a visiting friend, grown-up visiting friend, if you have lost your parents, what's the effect of that later on in life for you and so on. So they really have these, they're dealing with these issues. So maybe one way would be, asking these, there must be likewise institutions in the UK that does it. The other way that we have dealt with it is that we are looking more and more into different cultures of the evaluation. Instead of leading up of this, they always want effect studies and so on. We're trying, to shape, a feasible evaluation study, that we can see ourselves in, So that would be the other way. I mean, we've worked with mobile phones, for instance, where the children have to phone back. We have one project and then there's a database recording all the feedback that the children, give back on the mobile phone. So there is ways to do it, but the long-term issues are really difficult, but interesting. Yes, maybe we can talk more about it.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Maybe adding to that, I was thinking of maybe having a separate conversation about the universities deal with this as well in terms of alumni, because we have to track graduate outcomes, and there's a survey, of what happens with the graduates, and we have to report back. So they deal, in different ways. There's a formal survey that's related to the decrease in graduates, like this year and next year. But then long term, we want to know what happens with these graduates, and maybe for communities, with, I don't know, if it's professional, with the LinkedIn or any other social media, and then inviting alumni back. But also, I was thinking some sort of graduation from your program would be quite interesting, because it gives them a sense of like, I have gone through this and then belong to it, like forever, not? And then inviting them to kind of pay back, what do you do with your programs as opposed to creating something back. So it's around the community, extending the community, pay back. It's not huge. You need to do that in social media.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if we could swap details, and if anybody else has got any ideas, I mean, ideally what we want is somebody to dive in and go, we'll do this. we'll track them over the next 10 years and tell you where they've ended up, what they're doing, and how they're doing. That would be really useful. But we're in talks with the Scholl Centre at Said Business School at Oxford University, and even they say it's really difficult. It's very difficult, and the GDPR thing has created a real problem. So, yeah, 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 yeah. So, yeah, it'd be good to exchange.
Maybe if I could say another comment about observation of the panel, maybe it's very interesting how you all talked about being more or less accidental, which for me it's getting projects is accidental. We of course you don't think that we have some ways of doing things and we have implemented and some intention, but every project is different. And then the other observe and I completely agree with all of you is that design, this presence in the room and being there is is really important because it aligns people with this idea where we need to do something positive and they can leave the agenda behind, although that never leaves them, no? But it sort of emerges as they can. And this is what I noticed, as you said, Chris, in conversations with colleagues from sociology, from which we have a lot to learn. So design, and a lot of people have been out there, community organizing and so on for a long time. But a colleague told me, oh, social design. I had two comments. One was social design. That sounds like design engineering. That's very bad in sociology. And then the other one said, oh, that seems like the future of sociology. We are applying things. We're not just looking at it. So it's super interesting the power of actually coming together for something positive, whether it's making anything, but it's moving it outside the conversations.
Yeah. But in fact, there is design anthropology that because as well, people think anthropologists, they are very rigorous in observing phenomena and we are good at making actions, and as well working together is fantastic because we have a good understanding of the context, but then we bring this into action.
And designing that social interdisciplinarity as well is interesting. Another panel to add to the list, but not for today, unfortunately. All right, I really want to thank the panelists. It was a great discussion, so thank you so much for preparing the question and for being here today and for sharing your experiences. Thank you so much.